Hey everyone, welcome to our online service. We're glad you're here and we hope that you had a great week.
Well, welcome. Glad you're here and joining us today. We are continuing today in our series, The Game of Life. And today we're talking about taking our turn. Our sermon today is titled, It's Your Turn. I don't know if you've ever played a game with people that aren't really ready when it's their turn. Those people that you're playing a game, but when it gets down to that point, when it's time for them to take their turn, for whatever reason, they just don't seem ready, right? They're either distracted, they weren't paying attention, maybe they're really kind of not really still understanding how the game works, or maybe it's just that they take too long, like they wait till it's their turn to actually start thinking about what they want to do. I don't know about you, but I'm that guy that's kind of like, well, you had the whole time. We were like waiting. Why aren't you ready to take your turn? And it can be frustrating if you are competitive and you like to play games and people aren't ready like that. But there are a lot of people that kind of live out their faith this way. They're just not ready. They're not engaged. They're distracted. And what happens is when things are presented to them, when opportunities are before them, they're not ready to take them because they just really haven't been engaging with everything. Well, last week we talked about the fact that we need to take time to step back from life and realize that we're not in control. No matter how much we think we're in control, we aren't. And we need to be willing to play the game the way God intended us to play this game. If we're ever really going to feel like we're being fulfilled in life or we're winning, to use our game analogy, then we have to give control over to God. But that doesn't mean that then we just sit back and we do nothing, that we don't engage with it. Once we make the decision to surrender ourselves to Christ, we have to engage with what he has before us. We have to engage with the game. There are a lot of people that kind of have a tendency to say, well, okay, God, I turn it over to you. And then they just kind of sit back. They don't do anything. They engage very little. Maybe they engage a little bit. They start going to church or they read their Bible a little bit here and there, maybe even join a study every now and then. But they never or rarely seem to take the steps forward to really engage with their faith, to really take it serious, to really be ready when God has something in front of them, some way for them to make an impact for his kingdom. They never really take time to find out what God wants or put any effort in. And eventually what happens is their faith kind of has a tendency to become stale. And at the very least, it kind of becomes selfish, right? And what happens is we kind of trade one selfish life for another. I mean, quite frankly, let's face it, there are a lot of people that would say that we call ourselves Christians. There are a lot of people that come to church, but we kind of come with oftentimes just pretty much selfish motives. People, they come with that idea that, well, what's in it for me? It's all about what I want to get, not what I'm engaging with so that I can be ready for the opportunities that God puts in front of me. We get to start developing questions like, well, what are you going to do to help me grow? How are you feeding me? Right? We start thinking things like, I want my church to do this, and I want our worship to be this way, and I want the preaching to be that way, and I want these ministries to be happening so it can serve me. But you see, what happens is if we don't step forward and start engaging in the life that Christ has for us, if we don't start looking for the opportunities that God has for us to be serving, to be meeting needs, to be making an impact, then we just become what oftentimes is called consumer Christians. We would say we're in the game, but the truth is we're just kind of sitting there letting everyone else play while we just take it in. I have something I'd like us to just kind of think about today. It's a statement. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had a statement before that. Nope, no statement. Okay. Well, there we go. It's only when we start asking God for the opportunities to be used by him that we begin to really experience the life that he calls us to. Now think about that. It's only when we really start looking for ways that God can use us. It's only when we start asking him for those opportunities that we really begin to experience the life he calls us to experience. One person that sets a great example of that is Peter. Peter sets an awesome example of someone who's just kind of always ready. Right? I mean, Peter was just waiting for it to be his turn, right? I picture Peter's that guy at the game board that's just like constantly like, is it my turn yet? Is it my turn? I'm ready. I know what I want to do. I got to move. It's my turn, right? I mean, Peter was nobody special. Really, if you think about who Peter was, he was no one special. He was a fisherman. He was relatively uneducated. Not anyone that probably anyone ever would have thought would do much great in his life. The thing that made Peter special, the thing that set him apart, was that he was fully engaged in his life with Christ. See, Peter made the decision to play the game the way God intended. And once he did, he looked aggressively for opportunities to play. He was always ready to take his turn. Now, he made some mistakes in that, right? Peter, in fact, we kind of tease about Peter sometimes in the church that Peter had like foot and mouth disease, right? He would say dumb things sometimes. He would overstep his bounds. He made lots of mistakes, right? If you remember at the Transfiguration, Peter was there and he kind of jumps the gun and he's so excited to be there when Jesus is standing there with these other great men of faith from history. And Peter starts saying, hey, I'm going to build a shelter for everyone. Instead of just sitting back and kind of taking it in, and God kind of rebukes him. And then if you remember when Peter gets out of the boat, when Jesus is walking on the water, Peter gets out of the boat and he walks on water, and yet he gets distracted and fearful and he almost drowns, right? And those are the kind of things we look at with Peter. And then there's one time where Peter kind of tries to rebuke Jesus, like he knows better than Jesus. And then finally, what's another big mistake? Obviously, Peter was the one that denied him 3 times. So, it's easy to look at those mistakes that Peter made, but I tend to focus on the steps of faith that Peter took rather than the mistakes he made. Yeah, he opened his mouth too much at the Transfiguration, but at least he got to be at the Transfiguration. And there was a reason that God chose him as one of the ones to be there, because he knew that Peter was hungry. Yeah, Peter almost drowned, but you know what? Other than Jesus, Peter's the only person in history that can say he took a few steps on water. Yeah, Peter rebuked Jesus, but it was only because he was seeking so much to know what God wanted that he couldn't imagine Jesus going to the cross. Peter denied Jesus 3 times before he went to the cross, but only because he was the only one that continued following when things were dangerous. See, Peter was always looking for an opportunity. Every opportunity he saw, he took it. And that leads us to our first point. Peter was ready for his turn. We have to be ready for our turn. Be ready for your turn in life. Be ready. Be looking for the opportunities that God is putting in front of you. See, we all have turns or opportunities, if you will, that God puts in front of us. Things that God will put in your path, opportunities to take a step in faith and see what God will do with it. I ask you this question. As you think about your life today, as you think about things that are going on in your life, where you work, where your kids are going to school, clubs that you might be in, people you've gotten to know in the church, ministries and needs that you see within the church. I'd ask you this question: what opportunities has God put in your path? What opportunities has God put in your path? What are some things that when you look around, you might be able to say, hey, it's not about me, but I see needs that I can fill. It's not about what I need, but I see a place where God can use me. I see that God maybe has put me in this position so that I can serve in a way that maybe nobody else can. See, we oftentimes talk about at MBF Church that we are on mission. That's one of our vision statements, one of our values, if you will, within our vision. That we are on mission, that wherever God has placed you, he's placed you there for a purpose. He's placed you there to be on mission in that place, in that workplace, in that neighborhood, in that club, in that school. You are on mission. So maybe that opportunity is a neighbor who has a need, who's lost a loved one, maybe who is out of work or just having a financial difficulty or just needs a friend. Maybe it's someone in a time of need that you can serve, someone at work who's struggling just to maybe figure it out or new in their position and needs someone to come alongside them. Maybe it's serving in a ministry at the church or going on a mission trip. Where do you see a need that you can fill? See, Peter went on to do great things. Peter was kind of the person that the foundation of the church was kind of built on. Obviously, Jesus is the cornerstone of the church, but Peter was kind of the one that the Spirit used to really lay so much groundwork. But I don't think Peter would have been ready. I don't think Peter would have been used for that big thing had he not been faithful with the little things. And we see that in Peter, but we also see it throughout history. People that God did great things with, but oftentimes because they were willing to continue keeping their ears and their eyes open and stepping into faith, stepping into things that God placed in front of them. See, too often, there are people kind of with the attitude of they see a need, they see something that needs to be done, they see something that needs to change, and they say, you know, someone should fix that. Someone should do that. Someone should take care of it. Why isn't someone doing something about that? Why is the church so weak in this area? Why is the church not meeting this need? Why is the community struggling? Instead, what we should be saying is, God, what would you have me do? What would you have me do to fill that need? Ronald Reagan once paraphrased in one of his speeches a saying by a rabbi named Hillel from over 2,000 years ago that says this: if not me, then who? If not now, then when? And I think that should be the question that so many of us as Christ followers ask. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? God has put opportunities in front of every one of us. God doesn't just use a certain elite group of people or specific people with only certain kinds of gifts or strengths. God will use anyone and everyone who is willing to step into the opportunity, who's looking for the opportunity to take their turn. Which leads me to our next point. We need to not miss the little things. Don't miss the little things. David and I play a game every now and then called Axis and Allies. It's a strategic World War II game, and it takes anywhere between 4 and 9 hours to play this game. You play as all 5 of the strategic powers of World War II. And generally, once David got to be about 16, he beats me. Every now and then I'll beat him, but he has a tendency to beat me. And there's a reason. I know the reason. I see it every time, but it's just really hard for me to make myself do it. He pays attention to the little things. I have a tendency to be that kind of person that focuses in on the next big thing. And so you can see in this game, you can see the big battles coming, and you know the big battles and the big wars. It kind of plays out the way World War II plays out. And so you kind of know it, and it's easy for me to kind of put all my energy and all my strength just waiting for this big thing. And meanwhile, David pays very good attention on each turn, making sure he moves the 3 little guys from over here to this spot and does all the little things. And then he kind of eats away at me while I keep my eyes focused on this big thing. And it's always my detriment. And yet, I keep making that mistake. And I think so many of us, we make that mistake in our faith. We keep waiting for the big thing. One of these days, God's going to use me to do this big thing. And all the while, there's all these little opportunities around us that we're missing out on. And what ends up happening is the big thing never even gets to that place. We're not even ready for a big thing because we don't take advantage of the little things. So we have to pay attention to the little things that God puts in front of us. See, it's not going to start out with God calling you to start a ministry or to plant a church or to preach or to become a full-time missionary. Those aren't the things that happen where you're just working your job, doing your thing, and all of a sudden God just calls you to do it. It starts by being faithful in little things, by being the one who reaches out to your neighbors, by starting by serving once a month as a greeter in the hospitality area, or watching the babies in the nursery, or going on that short-term mission trip for the first time. I know someone who served as a full-time missionary for a few years that up until about 8 years prior to that, he had never been out of country to serve, and he went on a short-term mission trip. And that just kind of built to that place. Maybe it's by being that person who says, you know what, I'm going to start giving a percentage of my income. I've never made a decision to just be faithful in that little thing, and I'm going to pick a percentage, and I'm going to give a percentage of my income. I'm going to volunteer as a youth leader. I'm going to find a small need, and I'm going to fill that need. I'm going to do what I can regularly. See, a lot of us we'll serve here and there, right? We'll find something and we'll do it, here, and then we'll do it there. But there's a difference between that and being faithful in a little thing. There's a difference between just every now and then going, okay, I'm going to do this, and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to give once a month to this thing. I'm gonna give some time once a month to this. And then I'm gonna give once a week. I'm gonna give a couple hours once a week, and being faithful in something. Matthew 25, verse 14 through 30. Jesus tells a story to kind of illustrate this whole idea. And he basically tells the story of a man who's going on a trip. And before he goes on a trip, he calls 3 of his servants together, and he decides to put them in charge of his property. And to the first servant, based on their abilities and talents, he gives them a certain amount to be in charge of. So the first servant, he gives 5 talents. A talent is a measure of money. He says, I'm going to give you 5 to take charge of while I'm gone. To the second one, he says, I'm going to give you 2. You've shown yourself to be kind of faithful. I'll give you 2. And then the third one, he says, I'm going to give you 1. Obviously, someone he doesn't quite trust that much yet, hasn't shown himself to be that faithful, but he gives him 1. And the master goes away for a while, but then he comes back. He calls his servants to him. And the servant who had 5 talents comes to him and he says, Master, you gave me 5. I went out and traded with it, put it to work, and now I have 10 to present to you. And look what the master says in verse 21. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the second servant comes before him. He says, Master, you gave me 2. I did the same thing. I went out and I put it to work. I figured out ways to use it and grow it. And now I've got 4 to present to you. And in verse 23, his master says the same thing. well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Now think about that for a minute. Think about just how that had to feel for these guys, right? Their master who they look to and they respect, they know he's successful and he's been the one that provides for them. And he says, hey, you know what? I enter into the joy of me. And to come experience this joy with me, right? You've done well. I'm proud of you. But then the third one comes. And the third one comes to him and says, well, master, I didn't do that. Instead, what I went and did was I hid it. I buried it. I was afraid of you. I was afraid what you would do. So I buried the one talent that you gave me. And verse 26, the master answers him. He says, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I did not have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming, I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken. And cast this worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. See, this one didn't do anything. God gave him something, and he didn't do anything with it. God has given each and every one of us gifts and talents. He's given us strengths, and he calls each and every one of us to do something with it. You know, God's not going to hit us with a lightning bolt and say, hey, here's this big thing I want you to do. Instead, he's going to say, hey, I put opportunities in front of you. Were you looking for those opportunities, and did you take steps? And guess what? When you take steps, sometimes you're going to make a mistake. Sometimes you're going to do something, and people are going to laugh at it, and it's not going to work. Or it's just going to feel like you failed, just like Peter. But when you keep doing that, I'm going to use you because you're showing me that you have the heart to say, I want to be in the game. And that's what God's looking for. I'll tell you, I would choose 3 people who want to be engaged in the game over 100 people who are distracted and who aren't willing to look for opportunities. I'll take those 3 any day. Because those are 3 that God is gonna do something through. If we're not looking, we're gonna miss out. If we don't get on board with what God's doing, we'll miss out on the opportunities. I want to just close with this analogy, kind of get off the game analogy for a minute, if you will, and jump into an analogy of amusement parks. Some people enjoy amusement parks. I used to. I've gotten to a point where I avoid any kind of crowd like that, any best possibility I can. But for some of you that think of an amusement park as a great day off, I know there are some of you, imagine you'd never been to Disneyland. And everyone talks about Disneyland, how wonderful Disneyland is. And you're like, I got to get there. I got to go there. And you start looking for it. You plan your trip and you look into it, you investigate, and you decide, okay, I'm going to take that step. I'm going to go to Disneyland. I'm going to invest and do that. And you go. And Disneyland, if you've ever been there, it's an experience from the beginning, right? Even as you're parking, it's more of an experience than most places. and you're kind of like, wow, this place is cool. It's clean. It's well decorated. And then you take the little trolley thing through downtown Disney, and there's the shops and the manicured foliage and everything. And you're like, wow, this is awesome. And then you get to the gate, and you're excited. You're at the gate, and you take a couple photos, and you Facebook or Instagram yourself there and say, hey, finally made it. Excited to be here. You pay for your ticket. You go, take a little swallow when you pay for that ticket, but it's still, you feel like it's worth it. And you go in, and if you've ever been to Disneyland, it's that first entrance. It really is. It's kind of breathtaking. It's beautiful. And, and you can see the castle in the distance, and you love it. And you're taking some pictures, and there's even a few characters up there, and you take pictures of the characters, and you go to, there's a couple souvenir shops right there, because they know to get your money right when you walk in and when you're leaving. And, but so you go to the souvenir shops and you pick up some stuff, and you're like, this is awesome. And you get in, and you're like, okay, now I got to get started with my day. But you're a little overwhelmed, because you're like, I only have one day. And in this one day, I'm not going to be able to do it all. There's no way I'm going to be able to do it all in one day. So I got to think it out. So you decide to sit down on one of those nice little benches. And at first you're just sitting there and you're thinking about it. And you kind of, maybe you got a map, and you start studying the map. And you're reading through and trying to figure it all out. And then you decide, I'm gonna do some Yelp research and some other things to kind of find out which I should really make sure I get the best rides possible. I've only got time to get on a couple rides. I want to make sure I get the best rides, go to the best shops, go to the best shows. But then the more you read, it becomes confusing and gets a little frustrating and overwhelming. And before you know it, the day is ticking by. And now it's almost closing time. And you leave the park really having done almost nothing. And you go home and you kind of go, Disneyland really isn't all it's cracked up to be. I don't really get the big deal. Everyone said it's like this, a place that is a place of joy, place of excitement, place that I'm going to really experience some great things. I don't really get much of an experience. You see, a lot of people do that with our faith. We investigate, we decide to take that jump, we jump in. We give our life to Christ, just like walking through the gate, right? We tell a few people about it, we're excited, and it looks pretty good. But then we just kind of sit. We're like, it's overwhelming. I don't know where to go, and I'm confused. I don't know where I should serve. And so rather than doing anything, we just sit. And then we wonder, well, where's this fulfilling life that Jesus said I'd have? Where's the abundance he said I'd have? If we want to experience it, we got to start taking the opportunities he puts in front of us. Let's pray. God, you have placed each and every one of us in places where there are opportunities. You have given us all a place to be on mission. People that we can minister to, needs that we can meet, gifts that only we can use. God, help us not to sit on them. God, help us to utilize them so that we can serve you and we can experience the life that you have for us. God, help us to be ready when it's our turn. In Jesus' name, amen.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You give life, you give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. Let's stand and sing this together. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And it's your breath. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you only. Oh, and great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Oh, you are great. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord.
Thank you for joining us today. We want to be praying for you and we want to stay connected with you. So if you have any prayer requests or things that are going on, I encourage you, please use the link on the website or through the Church Center app to submit a prayer request for us. And we hope that you have a great week.